The notification flashed on Minjun's laptop screen at exactly 11:38 p.m. Subway prediction algorithm deployment complete. Ready for beta launch. He stared at the message through rain-spotted glasses, his hands trembling over the keyboard. 6 months of sleepless nights, building a crowding prediction system that could map every passenger flow in New York City's sprawling subway network. And tonight, it would finally go live. But instead of victory, Minjun felt hollow. The conference room at his midtown startup buzzed with celebration around him. His colleagues popped champagne bottles, their cheers echoing off glass walls while the city pulsed below through floor-to-ceiling windows.
Minjun, you did it!
Hyun-seok shouted, grabbing his shoulder. The beta testers love the almost empty car feature. This could change everything. Minjun nodded mechanically, forcing a smile. His phone vibrated against the table. Another notification. But this one made his throat constrict. A video call from his mother in Seoul, her face pixelated and concerned. Adula, she whispered, her voice breaking through the celebratory noise. Your father. The doctor said we need to discuss options. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers. I have to go, Minjun mumbled, grabbing his jacket. The elevator descended in cruel silence, while his mind raced between his father's diagnosis and the app that had consumed his life. Outside, rain attacked the sidewalk with the same merciless precision as the thoughts attacking his composure. Line 6 platform, 125th Street, almost midnight. The digital sign flickered. Next train, 3 minutes. Minjun stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, his success feeling like ash in his mouth. The nearly empty platform stretched before him like a metaphor for his isolation. When the train arrived, only 4 other passengers scattered across the cars, exactly what his algorithm had predicted. He chose an empty car and slumped into a corner seat, watching his reflection fragment in the wet windows. The train pulled away from the station, carrying him toward Queens and another sleepless night of video calls with doctors he'd never met, discussing treatment options for a father who'd grown distant across an ocean. That's when she stepped on. What happens when the algorithm you designed to predict loneliness leads you straight to the person who'll change everything? If you're already invested in Minjun's story, stay with us, because this one-stop encounter is about to become the most unpredictable journey of 2 lives. Makita Scott shook raindrops from her honey-colored curls as the subway doors slid shut behind her. 11:42 p.m., and she was finally heading home from another brutal client meeting in Manhattan. Another creative pitch dismissed by executives who wanted something safer, more predictable. Her vintage denim jacket clung to her shoulders, damp from the October storm that had turned the city into a watercolor painting. The car was nearly empty, just as her transit app had promised. 3 scattered passengers, including a man with glasses hunched in the corner seat, his shoulders shaking slightly. She could have chosen any seat in the car, but something pulled her toward him. Maybe it was the way his phone screen illuminated tears he was trying to hide. Maybe it was the familiar weight of loneliness she recognized in his posture. Or maybe it was simply the universe arranging its pieces. Makita slid into the seat beside him and pulled out her earphones. Mitski's Your Best American Girl was playing. A song about not fitting into someone else's world. About the ache of trying to belong. Without saying a word, she gently touched the stranger's arm and offered him one earphone. Minjun looked up, startled. Through his rain-fogged glasses, he saw warm brown eyes and a soft smile that somehow made the harsh subway lighting bearable. He accepted the earphone with a nod, and for exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds, they shared Mitski's voice singing about love and displacement while the train rocked through the tunnel. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The song created a pocket of intimacy in the anonymous city. 2 strangers connected by thin white wires, and the understanding that sometimes comfort comes from unexpected places. Minjun found himself breathing deeper for the first time in weeks. The woman beside him hummed softly along with the chorus, her fingers unconsciously sketching patterns in the air. He noticed her sketchbook balanced on her lap, filled with drawings of subway icons and interface designs, delicate lines that captured the poetry in everyday city life. "127th Street," the automated voice announced. Makita looked up as if waking from a dream. This was her stop. She pulled out the earphone reluctantly, handing it back to Min-jun with the same gentle smile. "Thank you," she whispered, the first words either had spoken, "for sharing the music." She stood, gathering her bag and jacket. Min-jun wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in his throat. The door chimes sounded their electronic farewell. Makita stepped onto the platform, and the train pulled away, carrying him deeper into the tunnel while she disappeared into the rain-soaked night. Only when the station lights faded did Min-jun notice what she'd left behind. Her sketchbook, wedged between the seat cushions like a message waiting to be discovered. Min-jun sat in his Astoria apartment at 6:47 a.m., holding Makita's sketchbook like it contained state secrets. Coffee grew cold beside his laptop while he turned each page, discovering a world of careful observations and gentle humor. Subway maps reimagined as blooming flowers. Platform benches that looked like piano keys. A series of sketches showing how people's postures changed when trains entered stations. Anticipation drawn in quick, confident strokes. On the inside cover, written in purple ink, "If found, please return to Makita Scott. My whole creative life is in here." Followed by a phone number with 2 digits smudged beyond recognition. Kyungrae Soh knocked on his door, bringing breakfast and questions about the app launch. "You disappeared last night right when investors were asking about you," he said, spreading takeout containers across Min-jun's kitchen table. "Mr. Chen from TechFlow wants to schedule a meeting about Series A funding." "Did you know," Min-jun said instead of responding, "that someone drew our entire subway system as a constellation map?" He showed Kyungrae a page where Makita had connected station dots into star patterns, transforming transportation into mythology. Kyungrae frowned. "Whose notebook is that? And why do you look like you haven't slept?" Min-jun told him about the shared earphone, the woman who'd appeared and vanished like a character from a dream. Kyungrae listened with growing concern. "You realize this is basically theft, right? You need to return that immediately." "I've been thinking about that." Min-jun pulled out a sheet of paper where he'd practiced writing the same message 12 different times. "What if I leave a note inside and put it back exactly where she dropped it?" The final version, carefully folded into a small origami crane, read, "If this notebook finds you, come back one stop. Same car, same time. Some encounters are too brief for proper introductions. The grateful stranger who shared your music." That evening, Min-jun returned to the 125th Street platform, notebook in hand. The same nearly empty train, the same corner seat. He placed the sketchbook carefully between the cushions, crane note tucked inside the front cover, and waited. She didn't come that night, or the next, or the next. For 7 consecutive evenings, Min-jun rode the 11:42 p.m. train, hoping to see honey-colored curls and warm brown eyes step through the doors. His algorithm predicted the car would be almost empty each time, and it was, except for his growing certainty that he'd lost something irreplaceable. Meanwhile, Makita was tearing her Bronx apartment apart, searching for her sketchbook. Client presentations loomed, and her best interface designs were trapped in those pages. She'd retraced her steps 3 times, called the MTA Lost and Found twice, and even posted on Instagram, "Lost my creative soul," aka my sketchbook, somewhere between Manhattan and home. Contains subway sketches and half-finished app mock-ups. Reward, eternal gratitude and homemade cookies. The post received dozens of sympathetic comments, but no useful leads. On the 8th night, Min-jun almost didn't board the train. His rational mind insisted this was foolish. A stranger's kindness didn't create obligation. But as the doors prepared to close, he stepped on anyway, drawn by the same inexplicable pull that had made her sit beside him. The notebook was gone. Aunt Ruth had been watching Makita pace the kitchen for 20 minutes, muttering about lost sketchbooks and missed opportunities. Finally, she set down her coffee mug with decisive authority. "Child, you're wearing a groove in my linoleum," Ruth said. "If this book is as important as you claim, you need to expand your search beyond Instagram posts and prayer." Ruth had raised Makita since she was 14, after Makita's parents died in a car accident that left her worldview permanently shifted toward impermanence and the preciousness of small moments. Over the years, Ruth had learned to read her niece's creative restlessness like weather patterns. "What are you suggesting?" Makita asked, finally sitting down. "Old-fashioned detective work. Flyers in the neighborhood, coffee shop bulletin boards, that Korean deli you love. Mr. Kim always lets people post notices in his window." Ruth pulled out a notepad and began sketching a plan with the methodical precision she brought to everything, from managing her catering business to managing Makita's tendency toward creative chaos. 2 hours later, they designed simple flyers with Makita's contact information and a description of the lost sketchbook. No reward money mentioned. Ruth believed the right person would return it without financial motivation. The Korean deli on Northern Boulevard in Queens had become Makita's favorite stop during her freelance wanderings around the city. Mr. Kim stocked the perfect balance of familiar snacks and exotic discoveries, and he always remembered her order: green tea Kit Kats and those honey cakes that tasted like childhood comfort. She was taping a flyer to his window when Min-jun walked up behind her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that made familiar words sound like music. "Are you Makita Scott?" She turned, and recognition hit like stepping into sunlight. The man with glasses from the subway, looking less devastated than he had that rainy night, but still carrying an air of careful vulnerability. In his hands, her sketchbook, along with a small paper crane perched on the cover. "You found it," she whispered, then louder. "You found it." Min-jun smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I've been looking for you for over a week, riding the same train every night, hoping you'd come back for it. You kept it safe all this time?" Makita opened the cover and discovered the origami crane, carefully unfolding it to reveal his note. She read it twice, then looked up at him with something between amazement and amusement. "You wanted me to come back one stop?" "It seemed like the right distance," Min-jun said, suddenly self-conscious. "Not too presumptuous, but hopeful." Mr. Kim emerged from behind the counter, beaming at the reunion happening in front of his store. "You find your book friend," he said to Makita, then to Min-jun. "You find your music lady." They stared at him in confusion until he explained. "She asked about subway notebook for weeks. You ask about woman with curly hair and sketchbook. I think universe has funny timing." Makita laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "Would you like to get coffee? I owe you at least that much for keeping my creative life safe." They walked to a small cafe 3 blocks away, rain beginning to mist around them again like a recurring theme. Min-jun had imagined this conversation dozens of times during his week of subway waiting, but reality felt both easier and more complex than his mental rehearsals. "I'm Min-jun Park," he said as they settled into a corner booth. "I work in data engineering. I built the app that probably told you which subway car would be emptiest that night. Makita Scott, freelance interface designer. I spend my days making apps intuitive for people like me who just want technology to feel human." She showed him a page in her recovered sketchbook, wireframes for a community sharing platform with hand-drawn icons that somehow made digital interaction feel warm. They talked for 3 hours. About the loneliness of creative work, the challenge of building something meaningful in a city that moved too fast for careful craftsmanship, the way music could create instant intimacy between strangers. Min-jun told her about his father's illness, the video calls that felt inadequate across the distance. Makita shared her theories about subway behavior, how underground spaces revealed people's truest selves. "That song you were listening to," Min-jun said as they prepared to leave. "I looked it up later. It's about not fitting into someone else's story, right?" "But maybe," Makita said, closing her sketchbook. "Sometimes 2 people who don't fit anywhere else can fit together perfectly." Outside the cafe, they stood under the same misting rain that had brought them together, neither quite ready to end the evening. Min-jun felt lighter than he had in months. Makita felt like she'd recovered more than just her sketchbook. She'd found a connection that made the sprawling city feel suddenly navigable. "Same train tomorrow night?" Minjun asked. "Just for one stop?" Makita grinned. "Just for one stop," he confirmed, though both suspected they were already planning to stay longer. 3 weeks of coffee dates and shared subway rides had created a routine that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Makita would board at 125th Street. Minjun would already be in their corner seat, and they'd share earphones for exactly one stop before she got off at 127th Street. The limitation was self-imposed but sacred, a boundary that kept their connection feeling special rather than inevitable. "It's like a really slow-motion romantic comedy," Aunt Ruth observed, watching Makita prepare for another evening meeting. "Except you're the one writing the script to be deliberately frustrating." "It's not frustrating," Makita protested, though she'd started sketching Minjun's profile from memory during client meetings. "It's anticipatory. Every conversation feels precious when you know it has limits." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Child, you realize there's no rule preventing you from spending more than one subway stop with a man who clearly adores you?" But there was something addictive about the constraint. Each evening's 4-minute conversation had to be perfect, distilled to its essence. They'd discovered they both loved rainy Tuesday mornings, Korean pears, and the way certain subway musicians could transform underground tunnels into concert halls. Minjun had started bringing her small origami creations: cranes, flowers, tiny subway cars folded from graph paper. Makita had begun sketching interface designs inspired by their conversations. "The one-stop rule keeps us honest," she'd explained to him the previous week. "No time for small talk or pretending to be someone we're not." Minjun understood the logic, even as he found himself wanting more. His app development work had become background noise to his anticipation of their evening meetings. Hyun-suk had started calling him the romantic engineer, teasing him about his sudden interest in subway scheduling and optimal commute timing. "You know she likes you, right?" Hyun-suk said during their Thursday lunch break. "Normal people would have exchanged phone numbers by now, maybe gone on an actual date." "We are dating," Minjun replied. "Just efficiently." "That's not dating, that's performance art." But the one-stop rule was working. Every conversation felt electric, charged with the knowledge that it would end soon. They'd started planning their topics during the day. Minjun would save interesting coding problems to share. Makita would bring sketches that needed a fresh perspective. The artificial scarcity made every moment feel valuable. On Thursday evening, the train was more crowded than usual. Makita found their corner seat occupied by a sleeping businessman. His briefcase sprawled across both seats. She and Minjun exchanged glances and moved to standing positions near the door, close enough to share earphones, but surrounded by the press of other passengers. "This feels different," Makita whispered as the train pulled away from 125th Street. "Bad different?" Minjun asked. "Real different, like we're part of the city instead of hiding from it." They swayed together with the train's rhythm, her shoulder brushing his arm, his hand steadying her when the train lurched around a curve. Other passengers flowed around them like water around stones, but for those 4 minutes and 23 seconds, they created their own small island of connection. 127th Street, the automated voice announced. Makita looked up at him, suddenly reluctant to follow their self-imposed rule. The doors opened, and evening commuters streamed past them. Minjun watched her internal debate play across her face, the same conflict he felt every night when she prepared to leave. "See you tomorrow?" she asked, stepping toward the door. "Same time, same stop," he confirmed. But as the doors began to close, Makita impulsively stepped back into the car. "Actually," she said, breathless with her own spontaneity, "what if we broke the rule tonight? Just once?" Minjun's face lit up like she'd just offered him the solution to an impossible equation. "You mean stay on the train? Maybe get off at my actual stop. Maybe grab dinner instead of just coffee." The words tumbled out faster than her usual careful consideration. "Maybe find out what happens when we have more than 4 minutes to talk." The train pulled into the next station, and for the first time in 3 weeks, Makita didn't get off. They rode together for 6 more stops, talking and laughing like they'd been friends for years instead of strangers who'd shared a few dozen brief conversations. When they finally emerged at her actual stop in the Bronx, the evening felt full of possibility. Over dinner at a small Ethiopian restaurant near her apartment, they discovered what happened when artificial limits were removed. The magic didn't disappear. If anything, having more time revealed new depths to their connection. Minjun told her about his dreams of building apps that brought people together rather than isolating them. Makita shared her secret ambition to design interfaces so intuitive that technology became invisible. The one-stop rule served its purpose, Makita said, as they shared injera bread and lentil stew. It got us comfortable with each other. But maybe we're ready for something less structured. Minjun smiled, pulling out a piece of paper from his pocket. Not origami this time, but a hand-drawn subway map with a new route marked in red ink. I was hoping you'd say that. Because I've been working on a revised itinerary. The route connected his apartment in Queens to hers in the Bronx, with stops marked for their favorite coffee shop, the Korean deli, a bookstore she'd mentioned, and a park where they could watch subway trains emerge from underground tunnels into daylight. You mapped out a relationship, Makita laughed, examining his careful notations. I mapped out possibilities, Minjun corrected. The route is just a suggestion. We can always change direction if we want to explore somewhere new. That night, walking her to her subway stop for the first time, they both felt the nervous excitement of crossing an invisible threshold. The one-stop rule had kept them safe, but safety was overrated when the alternative was the kind of connection that made the whole city feel smaller and more navigable. As Minjun's train pulled away from her platform, Makita waved goodbye with the certainty that tomorrow's reunion would be worth the temporary separation. The one-stop rule was officially retired, but the magic it had protected was just beginning. 2 months into their expanded relationship, Minjun finally admitted his secret to Makita. Every Tuesday night, he played guitar at an open mic in a basement venue near Columbia University, using the stage name J Park to avoid the professional complications of mixing his day job with his musical aspirations. You've been living a double life, Makita accused playfully as they descended the narrow stairs into the dimly lit performance space. Data engineer by day, sensitive musician by night. Very Clark Kent of you. Minjun adjusted his guitar case strap nervously. I started playing here 6 months ago, just to process everything with my father's illness. Music felt safer than talking to therapists, who couldn't understand the cultural complications. The venue was exactly what Makita had imagined. Exposed brick walls covered in band posters, mismatched furniture arranged around a small stage, the comfortable shabbiness of a place where artistic vulnerability was currency. She recognized the atmosphere immediately, similar to the design meetup she'd been attending, where creative people gathered to share work that felt too personal for professional settings. They found a table near the back. Makita ordered wine. Minjun stuck with coffee, and they listened to the first few performers. A spoken word poet processing a breakup, a folk singer with a voice like honey and gravel, a jazz trio working through complicated chord progressions. What do you usually play? Makita asked, watching Minjun's fingers unconsciously move along to the music. Covers, mostly, songs that feel like conversations I can't have in real life. He paused, then added with characteristic honesty, I've been working on something original, though, about subway encounters and timing and, well, about you, if I'm being completely transparent. Makita's heart performed a small somersault. You wrote a song about me. About us. About that night when you shared your earphone with a stranger who was falling apart in public. Minjun looked down at his hands. About how some connections feel inevitable even when they're completely unexpected. The host called J Park to the stage. Minjun kissed Makita's forehead, a gesture that felt both familiar and thrilling, and made his way through the small crowd. Watching him plug in his guitar and adjust the microphone, Makita saw him transform from the careful engineer she knew into someone more fluid and emotionally accessible. This is something new, Minjun said into the microphone, his accent making the words sound more intimate than a typical stage announcement. about underground spaces and overground connections, about the difference between algorithms and intuition. The song began with finger-picked guitar, gentle and contemplative. When Min-jun started singing, his voice carried the same quiet strength Makita had noticed in their subway conversations. Not showy, but deeply sincere. The lyrics painted pictures of empty train cars and shared music, of origami notes and coffee shop reunions, of two people learning to trust that some things don't need to be rushed. She sat down beside a stranger, in a city full of walls, shared her music like a secret, in the echo of the halls. 4 minutes and 23 seconds, but it felt like coming home. Sometimes the shortest distances are the longest roads we've known. Makita felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the recognition of being truly seen. Every detail was accurate, from the specific length of their first shared song to the way their connection had felt both brief and profound. The melody was simple, but memorable. The kind of song that would stick in your head and make you think of rainy nights and unexpected kindness. The audience responded with the kind of appreciative silence that indicated genuine emotional impact. When the applause began, several people looked around to see if the song's inspiration was in the room. Makita found herself blushing under their curious gazes, pride and shyness competing for dominance. Min-jun returned to their table with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd successfully shared something vulnerable. "So?" he asked, settling back into his chair. "What did you think?" "I think," Makita said, pulling out her sketchbook, "that I need to design the album cover." She showed him a quick sketch she'd drawn while he performed. Simple line art of 2 subway seats with earphone wires connecting them like a heart monitor. The image contained within a circle that could easily become a record label or app icon. The design was elegant and immediately recognizable, capturing the essence of their story in a few clean strokes. "You want to collaborate?" Min-jun asked, examining the sketch with the same attention he brought to code reviews. "I want to see what happens when your music meets my visual design. Maybe there's something there worth exploring." Makita turned to a fresh page and began sketching variations. The same basic concept rendered in different styles, each version suggesting different possibilities for how their individual talents might complement each other. They spent the rest of the evening listening to other performers while brainstorming a creative partnership that felt both practical and romantic. Min-jun had been writing songs for months without any visual identity. Makita had been designing interfaces without thinking about the audio experiences that might accompany them. Together, they could create something that engaged multiple senses. Digital experiences that felt as warm and personal as sharing earphones in an empty subway car. Walking back to the subway after the venue closed, they passed a late-night print shop with a digital display showing various design portfolios. "What if," Makita said, stopping to examine the screen, "we created an app that combined your music with location-based design, like songs that only play in specific subway stations, with custom interfaces that respond to the user's emotional state?" Min-jun considered this, his engineer's mind already working through technical possibilities. Ambient music that adapts to commute patterns, visual designs that shift based on time of day, weather, crowding data. Exactly. Technology that feels human because it's created by humans who understand connection. Makita linked her arm through his as they descended into the subway. Music and design and data all working together to make the city feel less lonely. The late-night train was nearly empty, just like the car where they'd first met. As they settled into seats across from each other, sharing earphones and listening to Min-jun's original song on repeat, they both felt the excitement of a new beginning. The one-stop rule had evolved into something bigger, a creative partnership that could transform their individual talents into something neither could have imagined alone. By the time they reached Min-jun's stop in Queens, they'd outlined their first collaborative project, an app that would let users create personalized soundtracks for their commutes, with interfaces that responded to the emotional tone of the music. It was ambitious, impractical, and exactly the kind of project that could only emerge from the intersection of technical skill and artistic vision. "Tomorrow," Makita said, as Min-jun prepared to get off the train, We start building something beautiful. Spring arrived in New York with the kind of optimism that made even subway platforms feel hopeful. Makita and Min-jun had spent 3 months developing their collaborative app, Resonance, which combined his location-based algorithms with her intuitive interface designs to create personalized soundtracks for urban life. Beta testers were responding enthusiastically, particularly to a feature that suggested meeting spots based on musical compatibility. Their Tuesday night routine had evolved too. Min-jun still played open mic sets, but now they were testing ground for songs that would eventually become part of Resonance's ambient soundtrack library. Makita had started joining him on stage occasionally, providing live visual accompaniment using a tablet app she'd designed that painted abstract patterns in response to musical input. They were becoming known in the small downtown creative scene as the subway couple, the pair who'd turned a chance encounter into both a love story and a business partnership. Which is why the email that arrived on Min-jun's phone during their Thursday morning coffee felt like a plot twist in someone else's story. "Austin?" Makita read over his shoulder, watching his face process the unexpected opportunity. "TechFlow wants to relocate you to Austin?" The offer was comprehensive and generous. Senior data engineer position, 30% salary increase, housing assistance, relocation expenses covered, and the detail that made Min-jun's heart race and stomach drop simultaneously, sponsorship for his H-1B visa renewal with an expedited path to permanent residency. "This solves everything," he said quietly, staring at his phone screen. "My visa situation, my career trajectory, financial security for helping with my father's medical bills. Everything except geography," Makita replied, trying to keep her voice neutral while her mind calculated distances. Austin was 1,700 miles away. Not exactly commuting distance, even for someone accustomed to New York's sprawling transit system. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching other customers navigate their Thursday morning routines. The coffee shop that had become their regular meeting place suddenly felt fragile, like a movie set that could be dismantled at any moment. "When do they need an answer?" Makita asked finally. 2 weeks. They're launching a new mobility platform and want someone with my background in urban transportation data. It's exactly the kind of project I've been hoping for. Min-jun's voice carried excitement and conflict in equal measure. "But the timing is terrible," Makita finished. "Right when Resonance is gaining traction. Right when we're..." She gestured between them, encompassing everything that couldn't be summarized in simple terms. Min-jun reached across the table and took her hand. "What if you came with me? Austin has a great creative scene, lower cost of living, better work-life balance. You could freelance from anywhere, and we could continue building Resonance together." Makita had considered this possibility during their silent minutes, running through the practical calculations. Her life was woven into New York's fabric. Aunt Ruth, her client network, the creative community she'd spent years building, the subway system that had literally brought them together. Moving to Austin would mean starting over, following someone else's career opportunity, while putting her own professional development on hold. "I can't make that decision in 2 weeks," she said honestly. "And I can't make it based on a relationship that's only 6 months old, no matter how amazing it feels." Min-jun nodded, though disappointment flickered across his features. "I understand. I wouldn't want you to uproot your life for me. But I also can't turn down an opportunity this significant without seriously considering it." They spent the next few days in careful conversation, exploring options and implications. Long-distance relationships, delayed decisions, alternative career paths. Every scenario seemed to require significant sacrifice from someone. Makita threw herself into Resonance development with increased intensity, as if perfecting their collaborative project could somehow solve the geographical problem. Min-jun researched Austin's tech scene obsessively, looking for ways to make the opportunity less appealing, so the decision would become easier. Aunt Ruth, when consulted, offered her characteristic blend of wisdom and pragmatism. "Love is important, baby, but it's not the only important thing. You've worked too hard building your independence to compromise it for someone else's career, no matter how much you care about them." Hyun-seok, predictably, encouraged Min-jun to take the job. This is your chance to establish yourself as more than just another immigrant engineer. Austin's tech scene is booming, and you'd have actual influence on product development instead of just implementing other people's ideas. Meanwhile, their Tuesday night performances began to reflect their uncertainty. Minjun's songs grew more complex and melancholy, exploring themes of opportunity and loss. Makita's visual responses became more abstract, patterns that suggested movement and separation rather than connection. "We're processing our relationship crisis in public," Makita observed, after a particularly emotional set about crossroads and difficult choices. "That feels very millennial of us." "At least we're creating good art from the angst," Minjun replied, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. As the 2-week deadline approached, they found themselves having the same circular conversations. Minjun felt trapped between gratitude for an incredible opportunity and guilt about disrupting their relationship. Makita battled between supporting his career ambitions and protecting her own hard-won independence. 3 days before his response was due, they took the subway to the exact spot where they'd first met, 125th Street, late evening, nearly empty car. Sitting in the same seats where Makita had offered her earphone to a tearful stranger, they tried to find clarity in the place where their story had begun. "What if we'd never met that night?" Makita asked, watching their reflection in the dark tunnel windows. "Would you take the Austin job?" Minjun considered this honestly. "Probably, yes. It represents everything I came to America hoping to find." "Then maybe," Makita said carefully, "you should take it now. Not despite our relationship, but because of it. Because caring about someone means wanting them to pursue their dreams, even when it's inconvenient for you." The words felt both generous and devastating. Minjun turned to look at her directly. "And what about resonance? What about us? Resonance can be developed from different cities if we're committed to it. And us." Makita paused, choosing her words with the precision she brought to interface design. "Us is strong enough to survive some uncertainty. Maybe it's even strong enough to survive some distance." They rode in silence for several stops, each wrestling with the implications of choosing growth over comfort, opportunity over proximity. When they finally got off the train, both felt the weight of a decision that would reshape their carefully constructed routine. "I'm going to say yes to Austin," Minjun said, as they stood on the platform. "But I'm also going to ask them for a delayed start date. Give us time to figure out how to make this work without abandoning everything we've built." Makita nodded, relieved and terrified in equal measure. "And I'm going to use that time to figure out what I want my career to look like independent of geography. Maybe it's time for me to take some bigger risks too." They kissed on the subway platform, a gesture that felt both like goodbye and like the beginning of a new chapter. Above them, trains continued their predictable routes through the city, carrying other people toward their own uncertain destinations. With Minjun's departure for Austin scheduled for the end of May, they decided to attempt their first real weekend together, 48 hours without the comfortable limitations of subway commutes and coffee shop boundaries. Makita suggested they treat it like a relationship stress test. If they could enjoy each other's company for an extended period, long-distance dating might actually be feasible. The weekend began promisingly. Friday evening, Minjun arrived at Makita's Bronx apartment with groceries and a plan to cook Korean fusion tacos, while she worked on resonance interface mock-ups at her kitchen table. The domestic scene felt natural and comfortable, music playing softly, conversation flowing between focused work sessions, the pleasant efficiency of two people sharing space without getting in each other's way. "This is nice," Makita observed, watching Minjun julienne vegetables with the precise technique he brought to everything. Very coupley without being suffocating. But Saturday morning introduced complications. Makita was accustomed to weekend solitude, long stretches of creative work interrupted only by her own schedule. Minjun, meanwhile, had planned a full itinerary of activities designed to maximize their time together. Brunch in Manhattan, a gallery opening in Chelsea, dinner reservations in Queens, possibly catching a late movie if they weren't too tired. "You scheduled our entire weekend?" Makita asked, examining the detailed timeline he'd created on his phone. "Like, down to travel time between locations?" I wanted to make sure we experienced everything possible before I leave, Minjun explained, not quite registering her tone. I researched the optimal route for hitting all these spots efficiently. Makita felt a familiar claustrophobia, the same feeling she got during overscheduled client presentations or family gatherings where every moment was accounted for. What if we just stayed here today? Worked on resonance? Maybe walked around the neighborhood? Grabbed food when we got hungry? But I made reservations, Minjun replied, already reaching for his jacket. And the gallery opening is only happening today. We can work on resonance from Austin once I'm settled there. Their first real disagreement emerged over something as simple as timing and expectations. Makita needed unstructured space to think and create. Minjun, facing the anxiety of major life changes, sought security and detailed planning. Neither approach was wrong, but they were fundamentally incompatible for a shared weekend. The gallery opening proved to be a social test they weren't prepared for. Minjun knew several people from the tech industry who attended art events for networking purposes. Makita recognized some designers from her freelance circle. Suddenly, they were navigating introductions and professional conversations while trying to present themselves as a couple, ready for long-distance commitment. "So you're moving to Austin?" asked Sarah, one of Makita's designer colleagues. "That's a big step for a relatively new relationship." "We're figuring it out as we go," Makita replied diplomatically, aware that Minjun was listening from his conversation with a startup founder interested in Resonance's commercial potential. "Long distance is tough," Sarah continued with well-meaning concern, "especially when you're both building your careers. Have you thought about what happens if it doesn't work out?" These were precisely the questions Makita had been avoiding thinking about directly. Standing in a crowded gallery, wine glass in hand, surrounded by the ambient noise of professional networking, she felt the weight of premature relationship pressure. They were being asked to make promises about a future neither could predict, based on a connection that, while genuine, was still relatively new. Meanwhile, Minjun was having his own challenging conversation. "Austin's tech scene is exploding," the startup founder was saying, "but it's also oversaturated with people trying to replicate Silicon Valley success. You sure you want to leave New York just when you've got something innovative happening here?" The evening continued with forced cheerfulness and growing tension. During dinner in Queens, they found themselves having stilted conversations about Austin's weather and cost of living, safe topics that avoided the increasingly obvious question of whether they were moving too fast toward something neither fully understood. Sunday morning brought the weekend's most revealing conflict. Makita's phone rang at 8:30 a.m. Aunt Ruth calling with a last-minute catering emergency that required immediate creative problem-solving. A client's event designer had canceled, and Ruth needed Makita's help with decorative elements that could be sourced and assembled within 6 hours. "I have to help her," Makita explained to Minjun, already reaching for her laptop to research solutions. This client could lead to major referrals for her business. Minjun checked his own phone, calculating the remaining hours of their planned weekend. "But we're supposed to go to that market in Brooklyn, and I wanted to show you the prototype for the Austin project before I leave. Can't that wait until tonight?" Makita was already fully focused on Ruth's crisis, her mind shifting into problem-solving mode. "I leave for Austin Wednesday morning. Tonight is when I'm packing and making last-minute arrangements." Minjun's voice carried frustration that surprised them both. "This is our last full day together for who knows how long." The fight that followed wasn't about catering emergencies or weekend schedules. It was about fundamental differences in how they prioritized relationships, handled stress, and made decisions under pressure. Makita valued flexibility and family loyalty above romantic plans. Minjun needed predictability and focused attention during times of major transition. "You're asking me to put our relationship ahead of my family's business," Makita said, recognizing the unfairness even as she felt compelled to help Ruth. "I'm asking you to prioritize our last weekend together over someone else's poor planning," Minjun replied, his frustration revealing deeper anxieties about their future compatibility. They spent Sunday afternoon in different boroughs, Makita helping Ruth execute an emergency event redesign, Minjun working alone in his apartment, both wondering if they'd discovered a fundamental incompatibility at the worst possible moment. By Sunday evening, when they met for their planned goodbye dinner, the weekend had accomplished the opposite of its intended purpose. Instead of feeling confident about long-distance dating, they both felt uncertain about whether their connection could survive the ordinary pressures of extended time together, let alone the extraordinary challenge of geographical separation. "Maybe," Makeda said carefully over dessert, "we were asking too much from one weekend, trying to prove something that can only be discovered over time." Minjun nodded, relieved that she'd articulated what they'd both been thinking. "The timing is terrible for experimenting with relationship compatibility. I'm too anxious about Austin. You're juggling too many professional commitments, and we're both trying to force something that has always worked better when it was natural." They walked back to the subway holding hands but feeling the distance that had somehow emerged between them over 2 days. The easy intimacy of their coffee shop conversations and Tuesday night collaborations felt complicated by the practical realities of building a life together. "So what happens Wednesday?" Makeda asked as they stood on the platform, waiting for trains that would take them in opposite directions. "I go to Austin. You keep building your career in New York. And we both take some time to figure out what we actually want from this relationship when we're not feeling pressured to make major decisions immediately." Minjun squeezed her hand. "Maybe distance will give us perspective we can't get when we're trying so hard to make everything perfect." It wasn't the romantic conclusion either had hoped for, but it felt honest. As Makeda's train arrived first, they kissed goodbye with the understanding that their next conversation might not happen for several weeks. Both needed space to process what they'd learned about themselves and each other during a weekend that had revealed more than either had been prepared to discover. The doors closed between them, and for the first time since sharing earphones in an empty subway car, they were both genuinely uncertain about what would happen next. Austin welcomed Minjun with relentless sunshine, and the kind of professional enthusiasm he'd hoped would distract him from the relationship complexity he'd left behind in New York. His new team at TechFlow was building an integrated mobility platform that would eventually connect ride-sharing, public transit, bike rentals, and walking routes into a single predictive interface, exactly the kind of ambitious project that required complete focus and long hours. Perfect, he thought, for avoiding difficult phone calls and text conversations that might not lead anywhere productive. Makeda, meanwhile, threw herself into expanding her freelance business with the same intensity she'd once brought to their collaborative app development. Ruth's catering emergency had led to 3 referrals from event planners who needed creative problem-solving under tight deadlines, exactly the kind of high-pressure projects that made relationship management feel like an unnecessary complication. For the first 2 weeks after Minjun's departure, they maintained sporadic contact. Brief text updates about weather and work, carefully neutral messages that avoided anything resembling emotional vulnerability. Both were performing the same psychological dance, protecting themselves from further disappointment, while leaving the door open for potential reconnection if circumstances changed. "You know you're allowed to miss him," Aunt Ruth observed during one of their Tuesday evening dinners, watching Makeda check her phone for messages that weren't arriving. "Pretending you don't care doesn't actually make the caring disappear." "I'm not pretending anything," Makeda replied, though she'd been avoiding the subway routes she'd taken with Minjun and had deleted the Resonance app mock-ups from her desktop to prevent accidental emotional triggers. "I'm just focused on work right now, like he's focused on his new job." Ruth raised an eyebrow, but didn't push further. She'd been through enough relationships herself to recognize the difference between healthy space and defensive avoidance. In Austin, Minjun was having parallel conversations with Hyun Seok, who'd accepted a position with a different tech company and moved to San Francisco. Long-distance relationships are complicated even when both people are committed to making them work, Hyun Seok said during one of their Sunday video calls. When you're both actively avoiding communication, that's not distance management. That's just slow-motion breakup. "We're not avoiding communication," Minjun protested, though he'd drafted and deleted dozens of messages to Makeda over the past month, unable to find the right tone between casual friendliness and deeper emotional honesty. "We're just giving each other space to adjust to new situations." "Uh-huh. And how's that working out for your emotional well-being?" Minjun looked around his Austin apartment, modern, efficiently furnished, completely lacking in personality or warmth. He'd been in the city for 6 weeks and had made no effort to explore its music scene, visit local art venues, or establish any of the creative connections that had enriched his life in New York. Work filled his days, Netflix filled his evenings, and the absence of Tuesday night open mic sessions left a gap he hadn't anticipated. "I miss her," he admitted to Hyun-seok, "but I also don't know what to do with that feeling." Our last weekend together revealed some fundamental compatibility questions that don't have easy answers. Like what? Like how we handle stress, make decisions about priorities, navigate the balance between independence and partnership. Important stuff that we never had to deal with when our relationship was mostly limited to subway rides and coffee dates. Back in New York, Makita was grappling with similar realizations. The creative partnership she'd built with Min-jun around Resonance had been more significant than she'd initially understood. Without his technical input and collaborative energy, her interface designs felt incomplete, lacking the functional sophistication that had made their joint project promising. She'd started attending different creative meetups, looking for new collaborative opportunities, but nothing replicated the easy creative chemistry they'd developed. Other developers approached design from a purely functional perspective, while other designers seemed uninterested in the technical elegance that had attracted her to Min-jun's work. "Maybe," she confided to her sketchbook during a late-night design session, "I was more invested in the professional partnership than I wanted to admit. Maybe losing him as a creative collaborator is actually harder than losing him as a romantic interest." The recognition felt both liberating and melancholic. 3 months into their unspoken separation, both Makita and Min-jun discovered something unexpected. They were thriving professionally in ways they hadn't anticipated. The absence of relationship maintenance had created space for individual growth that neither had prioritized during their intense period of collaboration. Makita's freelance business had evolved beyond interface design into full-scale user experience consulting. The problem-solving skills she'd developed during their weekend crisis had attracted attention from startups looking for creative directors who could think systemically about user interaction. Her portfolio now included 3 successful app launches, each incorporating design principles she'd refined during their Resonance collaboration, but applied to entirely different contexts. "You're glowing," Ruth observed during one of their increasingly rare dinner meetings. Makita had been traveling frequently for client presentations, her calendar packed with the kind of professional opportunities she'd dreamed about during her early freelance struggles. "Success suits you, baby. It feels good to be building something that's entirely mine," Makita admitted, reviewing mock-ups for a meditation app that would use ambient city sounds as relaxation triggers. "No compromises, no collaborative complications, no wondering if my creative vision aligns with someone else's technical constraints." But even as she said it, she felt a familiar pang. The meditation app would have been perfect for Min-jun's location-based expertise. She found herself sketching features that would require exactly the kind of data integration he specialized in, then deliberately simplifying her designs to avoid technical complexity she couldn't implement alone. In Austin, Min-jun was experiencing his own version of professional renaissance. The mobility platform project had evolved into something more ambitious than initially planned, a citywide transportation optimization system that could predict and prevent traffic congestion before it occurred. His algorithm had caught the attention of urban planning departments in 3 other Texas cities, and TechFlow was considering spinning off his work into a separate company with him as technical co-founder. "This is exactly what you moved here for," his project manager reminded him during their quarterly review. "You're not just implementing other people's ideas anymore. You're pioneering solutions that could reshape how entire cities manage transportation flow." Min-jun nodded, feeling the satisfaction of recognition he'd never experienced in New York. But late at night, working alone in his apartment while reviewing data visualizations, he missed having someone who understood the aesthetic implications of his technical choices. His algorithms were producing beautiful patterns, passenger flow maps that looked like abstract art, congestion predictions that resembled weather systems, but he had no one who could appreciate the visual poetry embedded in functional code. He'd started taking screenshots of his work, thinking about sending them to Makita, then deleting the messages before hitting send. The silence between them had become productive in unexpected ways. Without the pressure of maintaining constant communication, both had rediscovered aspects of themselves that had been subsumed by their intense connection. Makita was remembering why she'd chosen freelance work in the first place: the freedom to pursue projects that challenged her creatively, without needing external approval. Minjun was reconnecting with the pure intellectual joy of solving complex problems, without worrying about explaining his process to someone else. But productivity wasn't the same as fulfillment. Kyungrae Soh, during one of their monthly video calls, finally addressed what Minjun wasn't saying. "You know you can be professionally successful and still miss someone, right? Those aren't mutually exclusive conditions." "I don't want to disrupt her life just because I'm feeling nostalgic," Minjun replied, though he'd been following Makita's professional updates through mutual connections on LinkedIn. Her success was evident and impressive, exactly the kind of independent achievement he'd hoped she'd pursue. "She seems to be doing really well without the complication of long-distance dating. Did you ever consider that maybe she misses the collaboration as much as you do? That professional success and emotional connection aren't actually competing priorities?" Minjun hadn't considered that possibility. He'd been so focused on avoiding the mistakes of their failed weekend that he'd overcorrected into complete emotional distance. But Hyun Seok's question lingered. What if their creative partnership could exist independently of their romantic complications? Meanwhile, Makita was having similar realizations. Her meditation app project had stalled because she couldn't solve the technical challenges of integrating real-time city data with user interfaces. The problem required exactly the kind of systems thinking that had made their resonance collaboration so promising. "Pride is expensive," Ruth observed, watching Makita struggle with coding tutorials that would have taken Minjun minutes to explain. "Sometimes asking for help is the smartest business decision you can make." "This isn't about pride," Makita protested, though she'd been avoiding reaching out to other developers specifically because none of them understood her design philosophy the way Minjun had. "It's about building something independently." "Building something independently doesn't mean building it alone," Ruth replied with characteristic wisdom. "It means making choices based on what's best for your work, not what's safest for your feelings." That evening, Makita found herself reviewing old resonance mock-ups, remembering how easily their different expertise had complemented each other. Their creative partnership had produced better work than either could have created individually, not because they compromised their individual visions, but because their different perspectives had challenged each other toward more innovative solutions. She opened her laptop and began typing a message she'd been avoiding for 3 months. "Hey, I hope Austin is treating you well. I've been working on a project that has some interesting technical challenges, and I keep thinking about the systems approach you brought to Resonance. Would you be interested in a brief consultation? Professional only, obviously. I can pay your standard developer rates." She stared at the message for 20 minutes before hitting send. In Austin, Minjun's phone buzzed during his evening code review. Seeing Makita's name on his screen created the kind of nervous excitement he hadn't felt since their first coffee shop meeting. He read her message 3 times, analyzing every word choice for subtext, before realizing he was overthinking what appeared to be a straightforward professional inquiry. His response, sent after an hour of drafts: "Austin has been productive. I'd be happy to look at your technical challenges. Send me the details, and we can set up a consultation call. It's good to hear from you." Neither mentioned missing each other. Neither acknowledged the months of silence or the complicated history that made even professional communication feel significant. But both felt the possibility of reconnection, not as romantic partners navigating impossible logistics, but as creative collaborators who might have found a way to preserve the best parts of their partnership while accepting the limitations of their circumstances. For the first time in months, the silence between them felt like a pause rather than an ending. The consultation call was scheduled for Thursday evening, 7 p.m. Austin time, 8 p.m. New York time. Both had approached the reunion with careful professional boundaries, treating it like any other client meeting. Makita prepared detailed mock-ups and user flow diagrams. Minjun reviewed his transportation algorithm frameworks, looking for patterns that might apply to her meditation app challenges. But 30 seconds into the video call, seeing each other's faces for the first time in 4 months, all pretense of casual professional distance dissolved. "You look good," Makeda said, noting that Minjun's face had lost the stressed tightness she remembered from their last weeks in New York. Austin's sunshine had given him a healthier glow, and his apartment background showed plants, actual living plants, which was more domestic warmth than his Queen's place had ever displayed. "So do you," Minjun replied, seeing that Makeda's hair was longer now, her workspace more organized, her whole presence radiating the confidence that came with professional success. "Independent entrepreneurship suits you." They spent the first 20 minutes catching up on life details: his transportation platform's expansion, her consulting business growth, Austin's music scene versus New York's creative networking events. The conversation flowed with the same easy chemistry they'd always shared, but without the underlying tension of unresolved romantic expectations. "Okay," Makeda said finally, sharing her screen to show the meditation app mock-ups. "Let me show you what I'm trying to build, and you can tell me if I'm attempting something technically impossible." The concept was elegant: an app that would use real-time city data, traffic patterns, weather conditions, ambient noise levels, even subway scheduling, to create personalized meditation experiences that worked with urban environments rather than against them. Instead of asking users to find quiet spaces, the app would help them find calm within the chaos of city life. "So if someone's commuting during rush hour," Makeda explained, walking through her interface designs, the app would provide breathing exercises synchronized with train rhythm. If they're in a crowded park on a sunny day, it might offer walking meditation paths that incorporate the sounds of children playing and dogs barking as mindfulness anchors rather than distractions. Minjun studied her wireframes with growing excitement. "This is brilliant," he said, his engineer's mind already working through implementation possibilities. "You're essentially gamifying meditation by making the environment part of the solution instead of the problem." "Exactly. But I can't figure out how to integrate live city data without making the interface overwhelming. Users need simplicity, but the technical backend requires complexity." "That's actually a perfect use case for predictive algorithms," Minjun replied, already sketching notes. "Instead of showing users raw data, you could use machine learning to anticipate their needs based on location, time of day, and historical stress patterns." For the next 2 hours, they fell back into their old collaborative rhythm, Makeda proposing user experience challenges, Minjun suggesting technical solutions, both building on each other's ideas until the original concept had evolved into something more sophisticated than either could have imagined alone. "What if," Minjun said during a particularly inspired moment, "we incorporated some of the location-based features from Resonance? Music and meditation aren't that different. Both are about creating emotional states through audio experiences." The mention of their abandoned project created a moment of awkward silence. "I've actually been thinking about Resonance," Makeda admitted. "Not romantically," she added quickly, "but professionally. We were onto something with that concept. The beta feedback was incredibly positive before everything got complicated." Minjun nodded. "I've been incorporating some of those ideas into my Austin work, but in a completely different context. Transportation optimization, not social connection." "What if we didn't abandon it entirely?" Makeda asked, the idea forming as she spoke. "What if we developed it as separate modules that could work independently or together? Your transportation algorithms, my interface design, both available for other developers to build on. Open source collaboration," Minjun said, immediately grasping the concept. "We could maintain the intellectual property independently while sharing the foundational framework." They spent another hour outlining how this might work practically. Individual ownership of their respective expertise, shared credit for collaborative elements, no geographic limitations on development since everything would be handled digitally. Most importantly, no pressure to make personal decisions based on professional partnerships. "This feels sustainable," Makeda said as they prepared to end the call. "Like we found a way to preserve the best parts of working together without forcing the complicated parts." Minjun agreed, though he felt something else too. a creative excitement he'd been missing during his months of solo development. Should we set up regular collaboration calls? Maybe once a week, just to keep the momentum going? Professional partnerships require regular communication, Makita replied with mock seriousness, then smiled. Besides, I missed having someone who understands why elegant code is beautiful. After the call ended, both sat in their respective apartments feeling energized in a way they hadn't experienced in months. The professional collaboration offered something their romantic relationship had struggled to achieve: connection without pressure, partnership without possession, creative intimacy without emotional complications. Over the following weeks, their Thursday evening calls became the highlight of both their professional schedules. They developed protocols that kept their collaboration focused and productive: specific agendas, defined deliverables, clear boundaries about personal topics. Yet within those boundaries, their creative chemistry flourished. Minjun started incorporating visual design principles into his transportation algorithms, creating data visualizations that were not just functional, but aesthetically pleasing. Makita began thinking more systematically about user experience, considering how individual interface elements connected to larger technological systems. 3 weeks into their renewed collaboration, Minjun was reviewing code for the meditation app's location-based features when he had an idea that made him smile. In the algorithm that detected almost empty subway cars, a feature borrowed from his original transportation work, he embedded a small Easter egg. When the system identified a car with exactly 2 passengers, a tiny icon would appear showing 2 seats side by side. Most users would never notice it. The icon was subtle, appearing only under very specific conditions. But for anyone who understood the reference, it would serve as a quiet acknowledgement of how some encounters begin with sharing space in empty places. Makita discovered the Easter egg during her interface testing and called him immediately, laughing. "Did you seriously embed our origin story in the meditation app code?" "It seemed thematically appropriate," Minjun replied, pleased that she'd found it. "Mindfulness is about appreciating small moments of connection, right? You realize this means anyone who uses the app might accidentally discover our meet cute," Makita said. "Only if they're paying very close attention at exactly the right moment," Minjun replied. "Which seems fitting, actually. The best connections require both timing and awareness." That evening, for the first time since his move to Austin, Minjun felt like he'd found a way to honor their relationship without being trapped by it. The Easter egg represented everything that had been meaningful about their connection: attention to small details, shared experiences transformed into something beautiful, the integration of technical precision with emotional resonance. In New York, Makita found herself sketching interface elements inspired by their collaboration, designing user experiences that felt both sophisticated and warm. Their professional partnership had taught her something important. The best work emerged not from compromise, but from the synthesis of different expertise into something neither could have created alone. For both of them, the Easter egg became a symbol of possibility, proof that meaningful connections could evolve and adapt without being abandoned entirely. They were no longer romantic partners navigating impossible geography, but they were still collaborators who brought out each other's best creative work. It felt, finally, like a sustainable form of love. 6 months after their professional reunion, Makita and Minjun's meditation app, officially launched as Urban Zen, was featured in TechCrunch as one of the year's most innovative wellness applications. The article specifically praised their integration of city data with mindfulness practices, noting how the app transforms urban chaos into contemplative opportunity. But more significant than the press coverage was what happened next. 3 major technology companies reached out about licensing their collaborative framework for other applications. The open-source architecture they developed, Makita's intuitive design principles combined with Minjun's predictive algorithms, could be adapted for everything from educational apps to social networking platforms. "We accidentally created something bigger than we realized," Makita told Ruth during their weekly dinner, showing her the licensing inquiries on her laptop. "Companies are interested in the methodology, not just the specific app." Ruth examined the correspondence with the sharp business sense she'd developed running her catering company. "These numbers are substantial, baby. You're looking at passive income that could support your creative work for years. The financial opportunity was significant, but it also created a logistical challenge. Managing licensing deals and technical support would require more regular collaboration than their weekly Thursday calls could accommodate. They needed to decide whether to formalize their professional partnership or keep it limited to individual project consultations. During their next video call, Minjun raised the question directly. These licensing opportunities could be life-changing for both our careers, but they'd also require us to work together much more closely. We'd essentially be business partners, not just occasional collaborators. Makita had been thinking about the same issue. What does that look like practically? You're in Austin, I'm in New York. We both have other professional commitments. Remote partnership is definitely feasible, Minjun replied, having researched the logistics extensively. Shared digital workspace, regular video meetings, defined responsibility areas. Lots of successful tech companies operate with distributed teams. But what about the personal complications? Makita asked the question they'd both been avoiding. We have a romantic history that didn't end cleanly. Can we really be business partners without that affecting our professional judgment? Minjun considered this honestly. I think the fact that we've managed to collaborate successfully for 6 months without romantic drama suggests we've figured out healthy boundaries. We're different people than we were during that failed weekend experiment. It was true. Their Thursday calls had maintained strict professional focus, but they'd also revealed how much both had grown during their months apart. Makita had developed confidence in her independent decision-making that made her less anxious about maintaining creative control. Minjun had found professional satisfaction in Austin that reduced his need for validation through personal relationships. What if we treated it like any other business partnership? Makita suggested. Legal agreements, defined profit sharing, clear protocols for handling disagreements. Take the personal history out of the equation by professionalizing everything else. They spent the next month consulting with lawyers, business advisors, and other technology entrepreneurs who'd successfully managed remote partnerships. The process was educational and surprisingly therapeutic. Translating their creative chemistry into formal business structures required them to articulate exactly what each brought to their collaboration and how their different skills complemented each other. The legal paperwork was finalized on a Tuesday morning in November. Park Scott Creative Technologies officially existed as a limited liability partnership specializing in human-centered algorithm development and intuitive interface design. Their first client would be a transportation company interested in adapting their Urban Zen framework for reducing commuter stress through personalized route optimization. We're actually doing this, Makita said during their first official business meeting, reviewing contracts and deliverable timelines. We're building a company together from different time zones. It feels surreal, Minjun agreed, looking at their shared project management dashboard displaying tasks, deadlines, and revenue projections. But also right. Like we found a way to preserve everything that worked about our partnership while eliminating everything that didn't. The next few months proved their optimism justified. Working together professionally without romantic pressure allowed them to appreciate each other's talents without the anxiety of maintaining a personal relationship. Their creative output was more productive than it had been during their intense New York period. Focused, efficient, and consistently innovative. But something unexpected was happening too. As their business partnership deepened, they began sharing more personal details during their professional calls. Minjun mentioned dating someone briefly in Austin, then ending it because the connection felt superficial compared to relationships where he could discuss his work meaningfully. Makita talked about turning down a potential romantic interest because she realized she was comparing everyone to the intellectual intimacy she'd found with creative collaboration. I think I learned something about myself this year, Makita said during one of their February business meetings. I'm attracted to minds that challenge my creativity. Physical proximity is nice, but intellectual connection is essential. Minjun had been thinking along similar lines. Austin has a great dating scene, but I keep meeting people who either don't understand my work or aren't interested in their own creative growth. I miss having someone who gets excited about elegant solutions to complex problems. Neither was suggesting anything specific, but both were recognizing that their months of professional collaboration had revealed something important about compatibility. Their partnership worked, not despite their different locations, but because their different expertise created something more valuable than either could produce alone. The realization led to a different kind of conversation during their March quarterly business review. "What if," Minjun said carefully, "we considered whether our partnership might work in other areas of life too? Not immediately, not without careful consideration, but eventually?" Makita felt her heart perform that familiar somersault, but this time it was accompanied by thoughtful consideration rather than anxious excitement. "You mean like actually dating again? Long-distance dating that we both understand better now? I mean like exploring whether two people who collaborate this well professionally might also be compatible personally, given what we've learned about ourselves and each other over the past year." It was the most careful, rational approach to romantic possibility either had ever considered. No dramatic gestures, no pressure for immediate decisions, no assumption that professional compatibility automatically translated to personal relationship success. Just two people who discovered they worked well together in one context, considering whether that might extend to others. "I'd like to explore that possibility," Makita said. "But slowly, thoughtfully, with the same intentionality we've brought to building our business partnership." "Agreed," Minjun replied. "Maybe we start with longer conversations. See how it feels to discuss personal topics without the pressure of geographic logistics dictating our timeline." That evening, for the first time in over a year, they talked for 3 hours about topics that had nothing to do with work: books, music, family updates, hopes for the future. The conversation felt both familiar and new, like returning to a favorite song with better understanding of its melody and lyrics. By the time they hung up, both felt cautiously optimistic about a possibility they'd never considered before. Building a relationship that started with respect for each other's independence and grew from there, rather than beginning with romantic intensity and hoping practical compatibility would follow. Spring returned to New York with the same optimism that had characterized Makita and Minjun's first meeting 2 years earlier. Their business partnership had flourished through winter: 3 major clients, 2 patent applications, and revenue projections that would allow both to work exclusively on projects they found meaningful. But more importantly, their weekly personal conversations had revealed a deeper compatibility than either had recognized during their intense early romance. "I think," Minjun said during one of their April calls, "I'd like to visit New York. Not for business meetings, just to see you. To see if what we've built digitally translates to physical presence." Makita felt nervous excitement, rather than the anxious pressure she'd experienced during their previous reunion attempts. "I'd like that too. But let's be realistic about expectations. We're different people than we were 2 years ago." "That's exactly why I want to visit," Minjun replied. "To meet who you are now, not who I remember you being." They planned his visit with the same careful consideration they brought to business projects. 3 days in New York, separate accommodations, no predetermined relationship outcomes, just an opportunity to spend time together without the pressure of making permanent decisions. Minjun's flight landed at JFK on a Thursday evening in May. Instead of meeting at the airport or her apartment, they'd agreed to recreate their original encounter. 11:42 p.m. train, Line 6, 125th Street Station. It felt both nostalgic and symbolic, returning to the place where their story began, but as conscious adults making deliberate choices rather than strangers sharing accidental kindness. Makita arrived at the platform first, wearing the same vintage denim jacket she'd worn that rainy night, though everything else about her had evolved. Her confidence was more grounded now, her creative success evident in the way she carried herself. She was still the woman who offered earphones to crying strangers, but she was also someone who'd built an international business and learned to trust her own judgment about personal relationships. Minjun emerged from the stairs looking both familiar and transformed. Austin's sunshine had given him a healthier glow, and his whole presence radiated the kind of professional satisfaction that came from meaningful work. But more significant were the subtle changes in how he moved through space. Less hurried, more centered, like someone who'd found his place in the world, rather than someone still searching for it. They stood facing each other on the platform, both smiling at the deliberate absurdity of their reunion location. "So," Makita said, echoing their first conversation, "are you okay? You looked like you needed someone to sit with you that night." "I'm better than okay now," Minjun replied. "But I'm still glad you're here to sit with me." The 11:42 train arrived exactly on schedule, nearly empty just as it had been 2 years earlier. They chose the same seats where they'd first shared music, but this time, Minjun brought 2 sets of earphones, one connected to his phone playing their collaborative app's ambient soundtrack, the other connected to Makita's device with a playlist she'd created specifically for this moment. "What are we listening to?" Minjun asked as the train pulled away from the station. "Songs about second chances and better timing," Makita replied, offering him an earphone. "Songs about people who figured out how to love each other wisely instead of just intensely." They rode for 6 stops instead of 1, talking quietly about how their individual growth had created space for a different kind of connection. No desperate urgency, no artificial limitations, no pressure to prove anything except that they enjoyed each other's company and respected what each had built independently. "I've been thinking," Minjun said as they approached her stop, "about sustainable relationships, about the difference between connections that burn bright and fast versus ones that develop slowly and last longer." "What conclusion did you reach?" Makita asked. "That maybe the best partnerships, business or personal, are built on admiration rather than need. On choosing to be together because it makes both people better, not because either person feels incomplete alone." It was the most mature approach to romance either had ever articulated. They spent the next 3 days exploring New York together, visiting places that had been significant during their first relationship, but experiencing them with different perspectives. The Korean deli, where they'd first exchanged the sketchbook, now a regular stop during Makeda's neighborhood walks. The coffee shop where they'd talked for 3 hours, now a place where she often brought clients for informal creative meetings. The open mic venue where Minjun had performed his song about their subway encounter, now hosting a weekly showcase that featured several artists using their Urban Zen app for pre-performance anxiety management. "It's like we're touring the museum of our relationship," Makita observed as they walked through Central Park on Saturday afternoon. "But from the perspective of who we've become, not who we used to be." "Do you like who we've become?" Minjun asked. "Individually, yes. Together, I think we're more interesting than we were before. More capable of making good decisions about what we want from each other." Their physical chemistry was still present, but not overwhelming. They held hands while walking, kissed goodnight after dinner, shared comfortable silences and easy laughter. But the frantic intensity that had characterized their early relationship had been replaced by something steadier and more thoughtful. On Sunday evening, Minjun's last night in the city, they returned to 125th Street Station for their final subway ride together. This time, they weren't recreating their first meeting or trying to recapture past magic. They were simply 2 people who'd discovered they enjoyed each other's company and wanted to explore where that mutual appreciation might lead. "So," Makita said, as they settled into seats that no longer held symbolic significance, "just comfort. What happens next?" "I think," Minjun replied, "we continue building what we've been building. Our business partnership, our friendship, our understanding of each other as individuals who've chosen to share parts of our lives. And romantically? Romantically, I think we take our time, visit each other regularly, have honest conversations about what we want from a relationship, see how our feelings develop when they're not pressured by artificial timelines or geographic panic." Makita nodded, feeling relieved by his thoughtful approach. "Long-distance dating with business partnership backup and no pressure for immediate life decisions?" "Exactly. We've proven we can collaborate professionally across distance. Now we explore whether we can build a personal relationship the same way, intentionally, sustainably, with respect for each other's independence." As the train carried them through familiar tunnels, both felt something they'd never experienced during their first relationship: confidence in their ability to make good decisions about their shared future. They weren't desperate strangers grabbing at unexpected connection anymore. They were accomplished adults who'd learned to appreciate each other's contributions to their individual growth. "One more question," Makita said as they approached her stop. "Are we still following the one-stop rule? Or have we officially graduated to staying on the train as long as we want?" Minjun smiled, remembering how that artificial limitation had both protected and frustrated them during their early relationship. "I think we've earned the right to choose our own stops now." They rode together for 4 more stations, not because they had to, not because they were afraid of separation, but simply because they weren't ready for the evening to end. When Makita finally got off the train, they kissed goodbye with the certainty that this separation was temporary, chosen, and part of a larger journey they were building together. For the first time since sharing earphones in an empty subway car, they both felt like they knew where they were going. 8 months later, Minjun stood in the departure lounge at Austin Bergstrom International Airport, watching planes taxi toward runways while considering the most significant decision of his professional life. Park Scott Creative Technologies had been offered a major partnership with a Silicon Valley firm that would require relocating their headquarters to San Francisco, with satellite offices in both Austin and New York. The opportunity was extraordinary: 10 times their current revenue, expanded development teams, resources to pursue the kind of ambitious projects they'd only dreamed about during their Thursday night collaboration calls. But it would also mean leaving Austin, where he'd found professional satisfaction and personal stability. "You're overthinking this," Hyun-suk had told him during their last conversation. 2 years ago, you moved to Austin for career opportunity. Now you have an even better career opportunity that happens to be closer to New York. Sometimes the universe just lines up convenient timing. Convenient timing, or evidence that he and Makita had built something worth restructuring their lives around? Their relationship had evolved beautifully over the past year. Monthly visits, weekly video dates, daily text conversations that ranged from business strategies to personal observations to silly inside jokes that made both feel connected across the distance. They'd learned to navigate the logistics of long-distance partnership. Shared digital calendars, synchronized vacation schedules, carefully planned visits that maximized their time together while respecting their individual routines. More importantly, they'd discovered that physical distance didn't diminish their intellectual and emotional connection. If anything, the space between their daily lives had taught them to appreciate their shared time more consciously, to communicate more intentionally, to build their relationship on choice rather than convenience. "I love what we've built," Makita had told him during their last New York visit. "But I also love who I am when I'm building it. This relationship makes me better at everything else I do." That, Minjun reflected, was exactly what sustainable love should feel like. Not desperate need or overwhelming passion, but mutual enhancement, shared growth. The kind of partnership that made both people more capable of pursuing their individual dreams. His flight to JFK was boarding. In 3 hours, he'd be in New York for what he hoped would be more than just another business meeting. Hidden in his carry-on bag was a small velvet box containing an engagement ring. Not a traditional diamond, but a custom piece designed by a local Austin artist who worked with recycled subway tokens. The ring incorporated metal from old New York City transit tokens, transformed into something beautiful and new. It was, he thought, a perfect metaphor for what they'd built together. Makita was already at their usual coffee shop when he arrived, reviewing contracts for their San Francisco expansion, while sketching interface designs in the margins of legal documents. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting with the kind of genuine happiness that had become characteristic of their reunions. No anxiety, no pressure, just pure pleasure at seeing each other. "How was the flight?" she asked, making space for him at their small table. "Productive. I spent most of it thinking about infrastructure requirements for the San Francisco office." He sat down across from her, noting how naturally they'd developed shared routines even across distance. "What did you decide about the lead designer position?" "I want to take it," Makita replied without hesitation. Managing a creative team while maintaining our collaborative partnership feels like the next logical step in my career development. They spent an hour discussing business logistics, office locations, team management strategies, the creative opportunities that would emerge from expanding their partnership into a larger organization. But underneath the professional planning, both felt the excitement of a shared future that went beyond quarterly revenue reports and product development timelines. "There's something I want to show you," Min-jun said as they prepared to leave the coffee shop. "But not here. Would you take a walk with me?" They walked to the 125th Street subway station, the same platform where they'd recreated their first meeting a year earlier. Evening commuters flowed around them, everyone focused on their individual destinations, while Min-jun and Makita stood in the center of the controlled chaos, holding hands and remembering how their story had begun in a place just like this. "2 years ago," Min-jun said, "you sat next to a stranger who was having the worst night of his life. You shared your music with someone you didn't know, just because you recognized that he needed kindness. That stranger turned out to be pretty interesting," Makita replied, smiling at the memory. "He also turned out to love you," Min-jun continued, pulling the small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Not the desperate, anxious love we tried to build when we were afraid of losing each other, but the steady, choosing you everyday love we discovered when we learned to trust our partnership." Makita's heart performed that familiar somersault, but this time it was accompanied by certainty rather than anxiety. Min-jun opened the box to reveal the subway token ring, its recycled metal catching the platform's fluorescent lights and transforming them into something warm and beautiful. "This is made from old New York transit tokens," he explained. "Metal that carried thousands of people to their destinations, transformed into something that could carry us to ours." "Min-jun," Makita whispered, understanding the symbolism immediately. "I'm not asking you to change your life for me," he continued. "I'm asking if you want to build a life with me. San Francisco, New York, Austin, wherever our work takes us, as long as we're choosing the journey together." Makita looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the subway platform where their story had begun with a simple act of shared kindness. Everything about this moment felt right. The timing, the location, the careful thought he'd put into both the proposal and the ring design. "Yes," she said, extending her hand so he could slip the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I want to build a life with you. I want to keep collaborating on projects that matter and supporting each other's individual growth and figuring out how to love each other wisely." They kissed on the subway platform while commuters streamed around them. Two people who'd learned that the best relationships were built not on dramatic gestures, but on consistent choices, daily appreciation, and the willingness to grow together while remaining whole individually. "Should we take the train?" Min-jun asked, nodding toward an approaching subway car. "Where to?" Makita asked. "Wherever it goes," he replied. "We have the rest of our lives to figure out the specific destinations." They boarded the nearly empty car. Their transportation algorithm had predicted minimal crowding, and as always, the data was correct. As they settled into seats across from each other, sharing earphones connected to a playlist that included both Mitsuki's song from their first meeting and new music they'd discovered during their months of collaboration, both felt the deep satisfaction of a journey that had led them exactly where they belonged. "Same train, different people," Makita observed, listening to the familiar rhythm of wheels on track. "Same people, better understanding," Min-jun corrected gently. The train carried them through the tunnels beneath New York City, past stations they'd traveled through separately and together, toward whatever destination they chose. This time, there was no pressure to get off at any particular stop, no artificial limitations, no anxiety about timing or logistics. They could ride as long as they wanted, get off whenever they decided, transfer to different lines if their plans changed. For the first time since sharing earphones with a stranger in an empty subway car, they were traveling with complete freedom to choose their own adventure. And they chose to travel together. Epilogue. 1 year later. The small wedding ceremony took place on the rooftop of Mr. Kim's Korean deli in Queens, the same place where Min-jun had first asked about the woman with curly hair and sketchbook. Fairy lights strung between potted plants created an intimate atmosphere, while the Manhattan skyline provided a dramatic backdrop for vows that were written in both English and Korean, honoring both their individual backgrounds and their shared future. Aunt Ruth officiated the ceremony, having obtained online ordination specifically for this purpose. These two, she told the small gathering of family and friends, have shown us that the best love stories aren't about finding your other half, but about finding someone who appreciates the whole person you already are. Hyun Sok served as best man, delivering a speech about professional partnerships that become personal partnerships that make both people more successful in all areas of life. Mr. Kim provided the catering, a fusion menu that reflected their relationship's blend of different cultures and tastes. But the most meaningful moment came at the end of the ceremony, when instead of traditional rice or flower petals, guests threw subway tokens into the air, old transit pieces that would never be used for their original purpose but could still celebrate new journeys. That evening, as their reception wound down and guests began heading home, Makita and Min-jun descended into the subway for their first train ride as a married couple. The car was nearly empty, a Thursday night in Queens, exactly the kind of low-traffic timing their algorithm had predicted would provide space for quiet conversation. "Any regrets?" Makita asked as they settled into seats across from each other, her wedding dress carefully arranged to avoid the subway floor, his suit jacket draped over both their shoulders like a shared blanket. "About marrying my business partner?" Min-jun grinned. "That does create some interesting HR complications for our company." "About any of it. The long distance, the professional risks, the decision to build a life around someone you met by accident." Min-jun considered the question seriously. Their Park Scott Creative Technologies had expanded to 12 employees across 3 cities. The Urban Zen app now had over 1 million users worldwide. They'd been featured in Wired magazine as an example of how remote collaboration could produce innovation that surpassed traditional co-located development teams. But more than the professional success, they'd created a relationship model that honored both partnership and independence, shared goals, and individual growth. They maintained separate apartments in San Francisco, while sharing a weekend house in Marin County, where they could work on collaborative projects without the distractions of city life. They traveled frequently, sometimes together for business or pleasure, sometimes separately to maintain their individual friendships and creative interests. "No regrets," he said finally. "But I do have questions about our next collaborative project." "Which is?" "Whether we want to develop any small humans who might inherit our collaborative tendencies," Min-jun replied with characteristic careful consideration. Makita laughed, the same wind chime sound that had charmed him during their first coffee shop conversation. "I think that's a discussion for our next quarterly business review. Along with the San Francisco office expansion and the potential licensing deal with that European transportation company." "Very efficient," Min-jun approved. "I love how we've learned to integrate personal and professional planning." As their train approached the station where they'd transfer to the line that would take them home to their temporary New York apartment, they'd decided to spend their first week of marriage in the city where they'd met. Both felt the profound satisfaction of a journey that had exceeded all their original expectations. "Final question," Makita said as they prepared to get off the train. "If you could go back and tell that crying stranger on the platform 2 years ago what his future held, what would you say?" Min-jun thought about that night. His father's diagnosis, his professional uncertainty, his loneliness in a city where he'd never felt entirely at home. Then he looked at his wife, his business partner, his best friend, and the woman who'd taught him that love could be both passionate and sustainable, both intense and thoughtful. "I'd tell him," Min-jun said as the subway doors opened, "that sometimes the most important journeys begin when you're not even trying to go anywhere special, and that the right person will sit beside you for exactly as long as you need them to stay." They stepped onto the platform together, wedding clothes slightly rumpled from subway travel, completely happy with their choice to begin married life the same way they'd begun everything else. sharing space on public transportation, making practical decisions about their next destination, trusting that wherever they were going, they'd figure it out together. Above them, the electronic sign displayed their next connection. Transfer available to all lines. Perfect, they both thought simultaneously, because they still had everywhere to go.